Good morning and welcome to the American Public Works Association's Talking Top Tech webinar series. Today's panel discussion will be 1 hour in duration and is titled Talking Top Tech Smart Cities Edition. Due to the free form format of this program, it is not eligible for CEUs. My name is Rita Cassada and I will be your facilitator today. I am an education manager at APWA. I have a BS in Mechanical Engineering from Kansas State University and an MS in Engineering Management from the University of Kansas. I'm a licensed professional engineer in Kansas, and before joining APWA, I served as the Public Works Director for the City of Lewisburg, Kansas. A recording of today's program will be available in the APWA Members Library and on YouTube within 1 week. APWA members can log into the library to access this content free of charge. Not an APWA member? Take the members library for a test drive. Spend 2 weeks accessing all the materials in our members library for free. Look for the link to sign up in your email today after the program. Today's session is interactive, so if you have questions for our speakers, please type them into the chat pod. You may do this at any time throughout the program. When you're in full screen mode, you can access the chat pod by hovering the mouse at the top of the screen and clicking on the chat icon. Now it's time to introduce today's panelists. Dave Zelnock is Manager of Local Governmental Service for HR Green. George Wentz is the Deputy City Manager for Jurupa Valley, California. Frank Williams is the Administrator, Division of Infrastructure Management, City of Columbus, Ohio. Doug Webster is a Senior Associate with CBRE. John Tull is the Director of Infrastructure for the Facility Solutions Group. APWA is delighted to bring you such knowledge and experience. We are going to start the program with each of the panelists giving a brief overview of how they are involved with smart cities. Dave, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Rita. You know, one of the questions we get asked a lot is, what is the one most important thing that a public agency can do to advancing smart city approaches? And what I'd like to offer is that one of the most important things that you need is really an internal, what we call a senior level champion. In other words, someone who'll step forward and advocate on behalf of, but outside of public works. You know, I can tell you I've been public works director twice now here in Colorado, and probably the most important thing is to get buy-in or get support, advocacy, whatever you'd like to call it, from someone outside of public works. It could be an elected official, it can be your city manager, Board of County Commissioners member, but most importantly, with the benefits of all these smart technologies coming our way, such as driverless cars, interconnected to our public works infrastructure, these things are, as I said, only a few years away. The need for this infrastructure is going to skyrocket in the future. And I will tell you that public agencies that can pre-position themselves now for this inevitable future, we call it a tsunami wave of smart city applications, will find themselves years ahead of the curve when the true demand hits. Best of all, we'd like to say that with careful planning, many cities are finding innovative ways to make these needed infrastructure improvements self-funding and even revenue-generating today. And so again, the most important thing I would say is to go find a champion outside of public works who can help you advance yours from the outside. So, Rena, hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thank you, Dave. George, would you like to go next?
Certainly. Thank you, Rita. As Rita said, I am the Deputy City Manager for the City of Jurupa Valley here in Southern California. Jurupa Valley is located just east of Los Angeles, about 1.5 hours here in Riverside County. I have been challenged in the past about the drive time. Remind everybody that that is at 1 o'clock in the morning here in our area. Jurupa Valley will be 8 years old now this year. We have a population of over 106,000. And we're in the midst of building our own future because we are so young. We've been underserved by the county for years, but we have an opportunity in front of us to deliver the services that the residents voted for. Our city is really not what we would call a smart city by its definition, but we are working towards an infrastructure, having that in place to address what the demands will be in the future. Our city is made up of primarily rural, Midwestern type situation, with the desire to have some of the urban benefits that come along with being a city. We've kind of termed the area out here as rurban. So our challenge has really been to measure how the economic development and growth and all the various technologies can be a benefit to us and improve our services without sacrificing our community lifestyle. So one of our key goals is to take advantage of the new technologies and to better manage our future and to manage our resources and our costs in a better way. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Frank, would you like to go next?
Hey everyone, good morning. My name is Frank Williams. As mentioned, I am the administrator of the Division of Infrastructure Management here in the city of Columbus, Ohio. We are the 14th largest city in the country, spanning about 224 square miles. I have about 6,000 lane miles of oversight. I oversee 4 main groups: street maintenance, which is, of course, street repair, snow and ice control, and those types of items. We also have right-of-way management and permitting, which is sale of right-of-way, excavation permits, and things of that sort, sidewalk dining, shared mobility devices. That's the e-scooter phenomenon is underneath my group. Also long-range infrastructure planning. That's pavement management, your resurfacing program, bridge, bike, pedestrian programs are underneath me, and as well as GIS and IT applications, and those are, of course, anything that has to do with GIS, but also internal and external applications, such as work order systems, permitting types of programs, data visualization, and things like productivity tracking. For the most part, my involvement with smart cities and the smart endeavor, pretty much anything smart or that's considered smart somehow or another runs through my group, whether it be through snow and ice control and the autonomous vehicle movement, shared mobility devices, e-scooters, biking infrastructure and planning, asset management, multimodal trip applications. We work through those items throughout my group. And also one of the bigger parts is how data is transferred to help us make operational and policy and long-term infrastructure planning decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. Doug, would you like to go next?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Webster. I am a commercial real estate agent with CBRE here in Greenville. I'm part of CBRE's Global Energy and Sustainability Practice Group. And through that, I've been involved with the city in doing a lot of their sustainability issues and was actually chair of the committee for 6 years up until about a year ago. During that time, we went after a number of different projects and grants and found that we were running into problems getting grants that included both public and private funding. So about 2 years ago, a group of leaders here, we formed a public benefit corporation that's a 501c6, and that company was, the intention was for it to seek innovative technologies in transportation and infrastructure and engineering and education for the purpose of economic development. So we looked at it as an economic development play, and that led us into a number of different venues with autonomous vehicle and robotic providers, which had subsequently brought in some other major corporations that want to use Greenville as a place to do their testing and their proof of concept. And we'll get further into that as we go on through it. But the whole reason we have done this is to help bring economic development activities into the city of Greenville.
Thank you so much. John, and finally, would you like to give your intro?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. My name is John Tall. I'm the Director of Infrastructure for a company called Facility Solutions Group. We are one of the nation's largest electrical contractors and largest lighting-only distributor. My background is in real estate development, construction management, maintenance management, power generation, program development. And my way into smart cities is that several years ago, I started helping a friend of mine who had a startup in California to deploy ultra-wideband for micro-positioning. And the benefits of ultra-wideband is that it is a very stable waveform that is almost unjammable due to its properties. And the thing about this is that micro-positioning is really the only way to provide autonomous vehicles, and that although Uber and many other car manufacturers have quote-unquote autonomous vehicles, they rely on sensor technology, LiDAR, radar, optical, to provide the autonomous functions. The problem is anytime there's rain, dust, dirt, or interference, then the car is unsafe, where micro-positioning can provide up to 2 centimeter accuracy, which is well within a level of tolerance. And so, we believe that that really is the way in which we're going to get to that next level of autonomy. But before that happens, kind of my skill set really is how to leverage public infrastructure to facilitate the deployment of technologies. And I believe, and I think many others believe, that lighting is really the ideal conduit for the new smart city.
Thank you, John. We're now going to get started with the question and answers part of today's program. And remember, you can enter questions at any time through the chat pod. We have a few questions submitted in advance. We're going to start with those. First one is for George is going to start on answering this one. How is a smart city defined?
I guess I would, in its simplest form, I would say that it's an agency that's incorporating both information and various communication technologies to enhance the quality of their services and to better manage their resources and their costs, and frankly, to improve the quality of life in their community.
Thank you, George. And the next question is for Frank. In your opinion, what are some of the key components to becoming a smart city?
Thank you. I think one of the first items I would consider as a key component is asset management. I'm finding in talking to a lot of colleagues throughout the country that there's a push to become smart without necessarily knowing what you have oversight of, how many signs you have, how many street lights and things of that sort, and really having a good understanding of what you have to become smart about. The condition of that infrastructure that you are trying to improve or add that smart element to as well, I think is very important to get a handle on. Proper description of the problem you're solving. Being smart just for the sake of being smart can be costly and time-consuming. Correctly identifying the problem that you have throughout your group that you're working to solve by becoming smart. And overall, just that self-assessment for your municipality. What might be smart for the city of Columbus may not be smart for Canton, Michigan. So really, this is not one of those opportunities, in my opinion, to simply say what is Denver doing or what is this other city doing, and we're going to take that model and apply it to our group. You kind of have to really spend some time doing some self-assessment and finding out what you really want to solve and how it can impact the residents in your municipality in the most positive way. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Dave, could you tell us about one of the most important things a public agency would need to advance smart city approaches?
I think the most important thing is to get some advocacy of all too often those of us who've worked in public works, and I've been, as I said, director of public works of 2 of Colorado's largest cities, is that we tend to live in our own little worlds. And what I'd like to suggest is that really, if you're going to advance these technologies and these smart city solutions, it's going to take advocacy from beyond Public Works. And so reach out, certainly to your city managers or your senior staff members, but even beyond that, think about, I think it was Frank mentioned, this is an economic development tool. The chambers, the EDCs that you may have in your communities, and your elected officials can be huge. I just met Monday with some elected officials of a Denver area city here, and they're all jazzed up. They're ready to go for this thing, which makes the public works director's life a whole lot easier. I can tell you that nothing warms up your city manager more than his bosses advocating on behalf of, in this case, smart city technologies. Help educate them, help them understand the value. And we'll talk here in a little bit about benefits, costs, and maybe even ways these things can help pay for themselves. Nothing sweetens them up more than money, and that builds instant advocacy. And we'll talk about that here, I think, a little bit later on, Rita. So, but do reach out, get those elected officials, get those senior staff members behind your initiatives.
Thank you, Dave. We got our first live question from Joe. He said he appreciated the comment from Mr. Williams on addressing asset management. And his question is, what approach did Frank take to ensure Smart Cities Technologies supported his asset management program? Frank, you want to take that one?
Thank you, Jose. I appreciate the question. In all honesty, I transplanted to the city of Columbus after some of the SMART initiatives began. My concept forced the importance of asset management to the program kind of slid in behind the fact. So what we've been working on is taking what I consider to be a poor man's or poor woman's approach to smart asset management, where as some of the projects that are on the table right now that are going forward with inside of that SMART movement is to take staff where we're doing work orders and things like that and really being able to dump those items into what I consider like a one-stop shop place to where we can start identifying assets. So if, for example, there's a corridor in the city of Columbus that has been identified as quote-unquote a smart corridor. So what we've been doing is every time we're out, whether it be for a permit, whether it be for street maintenance, whether it be for any types of programs within the department, we try to make sure to extrapolate data from whether it be a work order or any type of information that comes back to bring back so that we have that asset and have the condition of that asset. Now, part two of that is, of course, when you start endeavoring, and I know there's a few vendors even on the call, we get inundated with the different types of vendors and consultants that do asset management. So we take advantage of their willingness to come in and do pilots and things of that sort and identify certain areas of the city that lay over or overlay well with some of the smart city movement. So just to, again, going back to what I believe that was Dave or Doug that mentioned getting that outside support, one of the things I'll tell you honestly is asset management is never a hot thing. You can't cut a ribbon when you do asset management. It's not the hot, thing. Nobody's going to take a big picture in front of asset management. So you definitely need to get support outside of your agency when folk can see that, I always mention Grandma Jones has an iPhone now, so she expects you to know what you have. And to get support for that asset management is very important because it can be costly, especially when you want your asset management to impact your whole department, whether it be the traffic management, infrastructure, power, utilities. Everybody can benefit from that asset management. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate that. The next question is, how does 5G fit into the Smart City platform? John, could you start with the answer on that one?
Absolutely. So 5G is secret sauce. It's, you hear a lot of buzz about it. People talk about it as, the next revolution, and indeed it's going to be, but in a context. So, 5G is two things. 5G is low latency and edge computing. And the combination of the two really allow for real-time decision-making in the infrastructure space. So an example would be the interface between vehicles and the traffic control system. In these situations, when you're able to get into real-time decision-making, you're able to then, kind of decrease gridlock and, do proper timing of lights. And there's a lot of talk about, creating systems that allow for first responders to, move through intersections without impediment. But, the important thing I think about 5G is it changes the relationship between sensor technology and decision-making processes, and that as 5G gets rolled out, and the lag is really going to be the software interface that is going to be able to aggregate the hundreds of millions of sensors, but it's a great starting point.
Thanks very much for that. And Dave also wanted to answer this question.
Just to expand a bit on what John was saying, absolutely. This 5G thing is beyond revolutionary. I think John mentioned that this word called latency, which is a word that I don't like. That's not speed necessarily. It's not speed of download. It's speed of connection time. And I think it was Frank, who I know is doing some work now in Columbus, largely paid for and funded with a huge grant from the DOT, is looking at smart cars and driverless vehicles. But this latency idea really will come from 5G. Because it's how quickly, and they're talking about latency in terms of 1 millisecond. And so, to John's point, to be able to locate a car precisely to within, he said, I think 2 centimeters is what they're looking at, means that you need to have a millisecond of latency. In other words, your car's got to be able to communicate with the 5G system wirelessly within 1 millisecond. Today, we're seeing latencies of 30, 40, 50, or 100 milliseconds. This 5G will bring it down below 1. And really the only way to do that is to deploy, and I can't believe this number, and if you remember nothing else from this conversation today, remember this number, the number of 5G transmitters per square mile of your city. And so I don't know, Frank, what you have in Columbus, or George, what you've got in Jurupa Valley, but if you've got 100 square miles in your city, the number is almost approaching 500 towers, transmitters, or antennas, 500 transmitters per square mile. So a 100 square mile city could literally have tens of thousands of these 5G towers and transmitters around. To put that in perspective, I'd like to say that's about 2 towers or 2 antennas for every 1 street light. And we can talk later about street lights, 5G, and towers. But if you have right now, I know the city of Golden, I saw Dan Hartman, who's our Region 9 APWA director, joined us. Dan was telling me the other day that they've got about 1,000 streetlights in Golden. At that rate, you can expect to have 2,000 5G towers in the next several years in a small city like Golden, Colorado. So, yeah, 5G is coming. Buckle up. It's going to get wild, and we call it a tsunami of 5G antennas, Rita. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Doug, you also wanted to answer this question?
Yeah, thanks, Rita. I echo what Dave said. The 5G impact, we believe, is going to be critical as we start seeing the deployment of connected infrastructure and connected development in real estate, specifically with real estate developments being able to interact with autonomous vehicles that we all believe are coming, whether it be freight delivery, whether it be passenger delivery, whatever. The ability for these vehicles to communicate not just with the infrastructure, but with each other in an exact time and space continuum where they're all interconnected through the infrastructure will maintain the safety that we're all looking for. And that's what we see 5G being able to bring into our city here.
Thanks, Doug. And I also have another question for you about Greenville. Can you tell us about what advantages Greenville has in attracting smart technology companies to your city?
Sure, and Dave mentioned it earlier. You really need a champion that's not just in public works, but someone who's really driven to have this all happen at this point in time. Fortunately, in Greenville, our group, the Carolinas Alliance for Innovation, we got together about 2 years ago, and we went to the cities and the counties in the area, and we got memorandums of understanding and their support with proclamations and things of that nature, resolutions that said they 100% support the Carolinas Alliance going out and seeking these innovative technologies and bringing them back to the city. Part of the problem that our city had is that we were very, very lean on our budget and our staff time. So to have someone dedicated to do that inside the city or the county was a stretch. And that's what the Carolinas Alliance was able to bring. And some of the members, the founding members, one was a city councilman, one was a county councilman. So we actually brought in the elected officials to help us build that champion model. And that's where the first thing happened. The second thing is Greenville is not a huge city. It's very scalable. It's easy to come in here. We're only about 29 square miles total with a population a little over 65,000 people. But during the daytime, our population doubles with people coming in from the county for work and adjacent counties as well. So the scalability of Greenville is such that we can start with a number of specific projects and deploy them fairly easily and quickly because we already have the political support in place, and we've already looked at where we wanted to deploy these technologies, which included a test track for autonomous vehicles that's currently located at a former Air Force base that's now called the South Carolina Technology and Aviation Center, and there still is an active runway there. There are a number of companies in that park, and they are using the runway, and they're actually delivering air flights and planes through some of the military applications. So we had a place to do it, we had the political support to do it, and we had the willingness of our public works people to try to improve our infrastructure. So that helped give Greenville an advantage in recruiting some of these companies, such as John's company, FSG, along with Sprint with their 5G and their Curiosity IoT package, and a number of other companies that want to come in and deploy and do their proof of concept here. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Just a reminder to all the participants, please enter your questions at any time during the chat pod so the panelists can answer those for you. Moving on, a question for Frank. Can you tell us about what are some of the challenges that come with the Smart City endeavor?
Okay, thank you. One of the first things I would say, probably three main ones that I would mention. The first one would be determining what areas to focus on throughout the city, especially if you're in a larger municipality, but even if you're in a smaller one. Does economic development drive, does infrastructure drive those decisions for what to implement and where? Interruptions to other programs and plans that run concurrently. For example, if you have a resurfacing program and now we've had here where we're testing some autonomous vehicle routes that just so happen are going through an area that needs to be resurfaced but was planned for 2020, but the autonomous vehicle is now going to be is slated to go down a roadway that is pretty much shot, and so now we've drawn all this attention to this roadway that an autonomous vehicle is going to be going down that was planned to get resurfaced not this year but next year. So like those smart items become easily can make you look not so smart because they impact other programs, and sometimes that coordination is a bit difficult to pivot from. One of the other things I would say is long-term policies and procedures. The smarter we get, the more it impacts whatever policies and practices that your city, your municipality had in the past. So, for example, here I oversee right-of-way management, and there are all kinds of different things that we typically didn't allow in the right-of-way that some of these smart implications actually challenge those policies and procedures. So now there may be councilmatic involvement to change. There may be legislation that needs to happen that all has to be taken into account. The reality is, the smarter we're getting, a lot of those things will have a positive impact, but the staffing levels on that you may have may not necessarily reflect what's needed to evaluate and implement some of your smart endeavors. Especially you have multitudes of vendors that all have a great idea, and somebody's got to sit down with these folks to hear out their pitches and hear how their products or approaches might assist you. Lastly, I would just mention this, and this is very important to any municipality, emotional intelligence. We have this term that we throw around, smart city, but what does that mean? Does that mean we were dumb before? We have staffing that have kept the cities together, long-term for many years, and all of a sudden we're talking smart, and that has an emotional impact to your staffing, especially when all of these conversations are very high level, and they're not reaching down, in my opinion, low enough to some of the staff with their boots on the ground to really have an understanding of what SMART means. In other words, I've spent a lot of time explaining that these things will help you in the long run. They're not meant to phase you out. They're not meant to make you feel less important to the city and how it runs. And those of you that are in leadership, I would say dust off your change management presentation, because you definitely will need to get to that level to make sure to talk people off of the ledge with some of these things, because does this really mean for more training for staff long term? Does this mean that staff will be redirected or repurposed at some point due to some of these smart endeavors? Your staff has Google just like everyone else, and sometimes more can be made of the smart endeavor than really what it is, or the impact can be over-dramatized. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. We have a question from Ty. Has anyone encountered public resistance to the deployment of small cell 5G sites on public infrastructure? And also, what strategies are used to address public concerns? Gosh, it was like a trifecta. I don't know whose hand raised first. Frank, you just talked to you, so let you continue on that one, and then maybe follow up with Dave and Doug.
Absolutely. When the other folk were talking, I about had a nervous flashback of the PTSD I've been dealing with on the subject, because, again, I mentioned permitting is part of my group, and as the small cell conversation has come about, a lot of the developers have pushed back because of aesthetics. I've had neighborhood groups pretty much march on City Hall because of not wanting so many of these items. Most people want the service and the benefits of the service, but not necessarily the infrastructure. So we've had to, the mayor's office actually led the effort of bringing everyone to the table, some of the larger developers, my group, power, the power departments, to kind of work through some design guidelines. That was a very big portion. There's also been a House bill that's run through Ohio that we've had to deal with, all to get to the same place. The idea was really more to make things palatable. I don't think we really solved everyone's issue, but we did work very hard to bring everybody to the table to make sure everyone was heard, to develop a way going forward. But I would say the other part of that was making sure to put the responsibility on those particular 5G vendors to do the education. It really wouldn't have made sense for myself or the city to take the lead in that regard. So we've really pressed the different vendors to educate and be responsible, whether it be going to public meetings and taking those questions and calming some of the frustrations and answering those questions going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. And Dave also wanted to answer that question.
Yeah, thanks, Rita. So the question really talks about, is there resistance to these 5G towers? I would say absolutely yes. I was just last week speaking before the mayor and city council of a California beach city. This is a city known for their sunset views of the Pacific Ocean. Unobstructed view sheds is what they're most proud of, obviously, in a California beach city. Most folks have not, or may not have heard yet, that several months ago the FCC came out with a new ruling that essentially tells cities that you can't say no. When a 5G provider, T-Mobile, Sprint, AT&T, Verizon are the largest ones there, you really can't say no. And the scary part about that is they can pretty much come in and install, as I said earlier, 480 cellular transmitters, 5G transmitters per square mile. And if you assume 2 street cuts per tower, that's 1,000 street cuts to people like Frank and George who have to manage these things, 1,000 street cuts per square mile coming in. So what I told this California city last Tuesday was, think of the resistance really coming 3 ways. Number one, aerially, and there's, by the way, over 100 cities who filed lawsuits, and it's bounced between, I think, a California Circuit Court, Denver, and now it's back in California to resolve this on a national basis. Can these cellular providers install thousands of cell towers per square, or hundreds of cell towers per square mile in your city? Aerially, you can't say no right now. The lawsuit, I think, will define that. Secondly, is on the surface. Keep in mind that every one of these aerial towers needs to have a surface box of some sort, and I shared with them a group of 6 surface boxes in one certain location, and then subsurface, which means they're digging holes in the street to put the fiber optics in, because these small cell towers, the 5G, needs to have fiber optic connection. So the resistance really comes aerially from obstructing the view shed, from the surface from these boxes, and then subsurface from digging holes to put the fiber optic cables in. Bottom line is, I guess the point I'd like to make is that that we're actually we've written more than a dozen of these aesthetic controls. If you don't have
Dave, I think we've lost your audio, so we'll probably circle back to you. On that topic of 5G and small cell, I just want to mention that APWA, the Utilities and Public Rights of Way Committee, will be presenting at Click Listen Learn on May 23rd at 10 a.m. Central. It's entitled Small Cell, a Municipal Perspective. So on that subject, you might want to sign up for that next webinar. And looks like Frank has his hand raised. Do you want to add to that conversation on small cell and 5G?
One thing I kind of sort of mentioned it, but I wanted to make sure to address what are the strategies to address public concerns. One of those things that we really did was develop design guidelines and brought in, several people from the Departments of Development, again, my group, and let neighborhood liaisons become a part of to ask their questions directly to the Sprints and AT&Ts, for a lot of their questions. So I would definitely create a working group or get people to the table to address those things and answer the questions directly, so that the media isn't driving that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And George also wanted to add to that answer.
Yes, I wanted to just point out one other argument that we've heard quite often from the public related to the item, particularly for small cell and technology. That relates to the potential health risks that are associated with the towers going in and the emissions coming off of those towers. While there's been no demonstrated scientific evidence that it is in fact a health risk, there have been numerous individuals as well as agencies cited as to studies and to things they've identified related to those potential health risks. So you're going to hear that argument from the public, and it's going to have to be something that is dealt with. It's not too much different than a lot of the overhead tower lines you see now and the health risks that are being discussed there. So be prepared for that argument also.
Thank you, George. We're going to try to circle back to Dave and see if we got technology on our side to finish his answer. And technology is fighting us, Dave. We'll check with you here in a little bit. I think we're going to go on to the next question. and it's from Joe. The introduction of IoT and edge devices to support smart city infrastructure introduces potential network security risks for cities. How do you maintain citizen confidence that the risk of network breaches is mitigated and worth the benefits? And remember who was going to, Dave, did you want to try answering that one, or we can move on to someone else? How about let's go to Doug, and then we'll circle back and see if anybody else wants to answer it. Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, good question. That is a concern. Part of the 5G Curiosity IoT packages that we're seeing being offered by people like Sprint and AT&T and Verizon and so forth also ties in with the data aggregation and the data collection from that communications portal. And that's really where our security needs to be aimed, in my opinion. Part of that means the companies that do that data aggregation and the edge cloud computing to use their kind of security systems that include blockchain applications, things of that nature, to help make it as robust as possible and as secure as possible. But even more importantly, that the data that is gathered for the use of the city or the county or whatever municipality is secure to get to them and to the right people within that organization, that it's not on a public venue. So that's the way that we've been approaching it here in Greenville with Sprint and with DXC Corporation, who's doing some of the data aggregation work for us and the security that goes along with that. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much on that. Let's see, the next question is for George. If smart cities are inevitable, what can I do today?
Let me take a moment maybe just to identify three of them. Frank actually mentioned one of them earlier, and that relates to policies. You really need to have policies in place for all these areas. There's been a lot of discussion, again, about 5G and small cell related activities. There is a tsunami, using Dave's words, coming. So make sure those policies are in place, that you have regulations also in place that help identify how the city is going to administer the particular, I guess, inevitable small cells coming. The other thing that we find often that is not in place yet, especially those to who this technology is new and is still coming, is related to a strategic plan. We're suggesting that each city should really put together its own strategic plan and have that in place. Quite frankly, we're working on that now in Jurupa Valley, and we'll be taking something to council in the very near future to make sure that we have something on the books. Because if you don't have something on the books in terms of what to follow, as Dave said earlier, the federal regulations kick in, and you really have very little on which to depend otherwise. So those are just three quick areas, Rita.
All right, and Doug, we'll go to you next, and then Frank.
Yes, good morning. Part of the situation that we're seeing in Greenville is how do you end up paying for these technologies, and not just the actual deployment and application as much. And that's something I think we'll probably get to here in a few minutes. And I want to defer to John Toll on that, because he has actually put in a proposal with the city that does just that. So I'll defer to him on that aspect of the question. Thanks.
All right, and John, did you want to answer that that Doug talked about?
Yeah, I hope I answered this correctly. The big thing I think about smart cities is ultimately at the end of the day, there are thousands of options and opportunities, but there's only a few worth really running down. And I think that, kind of a lot of cities are being bombarded with all the various options. But, I think that, when you look at a smart city and you look at a deployment, really thinking about what is the backbone, what is the bare minimum that you need to, kind of achieve what you're trying to achieve. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, communications is the medium that, cities should focus on and put in place and then build out functionality from there. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dave, you wanted to add to that question as well?
Yeah, just talking about getting these to help pay for themselves. I think one of the most important things is on these streetlights. Back to our friends over in Golden, Colorado, they that of the 100 cities in the local power companies area, they get the prize for being the first city in Colorado to municipalize their street lighting. Just a good rule of thumb, a street light here in Colorado costs about $20 per street light per month. And of that $20, only $2 of the 20 goes, oddly enough, for power. The other $18 of the 20 goes to profit for the power company. Well, what we're seeing nationally, and this is happening now actually in many dozens of cities, they are municipalizing the street lighting. And back to Doug's point earlier, that when these 5G towers come out, some cities are now requiring a replacement of a street light with a 5G tower. In other words, if you want to put a 5G tower on the block down the corner by Grandma's house, you'll yank the street light the city's now paying $20 a month. That's $240 a year. They'll require them to pull the street light out, so there's a cost avoidance of $240 a year. And then under the new FCC rules, which I said earlier, are now under some challenge, but you can charge roughly an equal amount for rental, essentially, of that street light location. So combined, there's a cost avoidance of about $240 and a revenue generation of about another $240, $250. There's about $500 per street light location per year, $500 per light per year. And keep in mind, there could be, by some estimates, approaching 400 to 500 of these locations per square mile. And so literally we're seeing millions of dollars in revenue generation opportunities by municipalizing the street lighting, to George's point earlier, requiring these aesthetic standards to work in conjunction with these smart city applications. And oh, by the way, what we've done in cities like Centennial, Colorado, where I was public works director for quite some time, the city there installed over 60 miles of co-located fiber. So when you're installing a fiber optic cable, or an installer is, the first foot costs about $20 a foot. We were requiring co-location of a second city-owned pipe for about $2 a foot. And so we spent over about a 4-year period, the city spent about $600,000 and got a 60-mile network worth $20 million for $600K. So really, those are the kind of revenue generation technologies. By the way, the city there now has a knockoff or competitor to Google Fiber called Ting Fiber, and Ting is now providing gigabit service. They're making it ubiquitous across all, that's Denver, South City, to get gigabit service to the entire city of 100,000 over the traffic signal co-located fiber optic network that was installed for pennies on the dollar. So if you look at street lights, gigifying a city, co-locating fiber, these strategies actually work. And back to George's point, but you have to have the rules in the books to begin that path.
Thank you so much, Dave. The next question is from Clarissa. From the consulting side in transportation or development, how can we better prepare to serve cities that use smart technologies? And Frank was going to start with that answer.
Hey, thank you, Clarissa. I would say that one of the first things that would help me from the consultant side is to familiarize yourself with the policies and practices of my municipality before coming to the table. Oftentimes, folk come in, and then I spend, so much time explaining what we're doing and where we are that now then you have to come back again with how you could possibly help me. So we've, made that, introduction, and then, there's several meetings that are needing to happen where, in my opinion, I kind of mentioned to consultants that Google is your friend. If you Google, what's going on, what are the focuses of the administration, you should be coming to the table with solutions that can help support the agenda of the administration. For example, we have our mayor here in Columbus. He has 3 goals: neighborhoods, neighborhoods, neighborhoods. So if you come in to sit down and talk to me, it'd be a good idea if you talk to me about something that can impact neighborhoods. You coming in with, a solution that works for downtown is probably not going to, move me, and it's probably not something that I can take further because it contradicts or it's not really the focus of what the mayor has. So I would really suggest having someone do that research, that R&D before coming to the table and familiarizing themselves with the policies and practices as it relates to procurement and those types of things, but also what the focuses are of the city and how you can incorporate your service or product with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And the next question is for John. As a service provider, what do you see as the greatest impediment to deploying smart city technology?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think first, and going off what, Frank just said, is that, when you sit down and you meet with, the city officials, they've got a lot on their plate. I mean, they're really working hard. They've got a lot of different competing interests, kind of pulling at them. And so, I see in a lot of situations kind of a paralysis of analysis. I mean, there's just so many options, and I think, talking to Frank's point is that you really need to go in and listen and be prepared to provide a solution that they're looking for rather than try to, sell your solution. And, an example of that would be what we're doing in Greenville. We met with the City Works Director, and we talked about what we wanted to do on Fair Forest Way so we could deploy ultra-wideband, and, we are doing it through the lighting infrastructure, so we're upgrading the lighting. But, very quickly we started hearing a lot of issues that they were having, and, so we really tried to tailor our solutions to meet their needs rather than what we were trying to sell. I'd say, the next step really is issues with procurement, right? Because, public agencies are required to have, very rigorous bidding processes, and this really, I think, slows down a lot of projects, and it becomes incumbent upon me to actually be the expert in procurement and to help them through that process. And, I think that, that's compounded by the fact that city technology, or the, smart city technology is new to a lot of people, and it's very difficult to write a specification for an RFP. So it's kind of, you're going into this arena not really fully knowing exactly how to get where you need to be. And so I see that as, kind of definitely a big challenge. And I guess the last, which Dave was talking about, is streetlight ownership. When you own the lighting infrastructure, it's very easy and cost-effective to deploy advanced technologies. I have sitting in front of me 2 different photocells. This photocell here is just your standard switch on top of a light fixture. We can replace it with this at no extra labor cost. And, so while we're upgrading, the infrastructure that needs to be upgraded anyhow, we can go in and put something in place at little to no cost. And, it's difficult, I think, for a city to get from A to Z. And so, trying to, come up with an incremental step for them to follow so they can get to where they want to be without having to make giant leaps. That's about it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We're kind of towards the end of our questions, but wanted to allow our panelists to give one parting thought on smart cities. And we'll start with John, if you have anything else you want to add.
Well, what I would say, I'm a guy who, when I look at a problem, I say, can I build this? And if I can't build it, it's either that I don't understand it or it's not buildable. And so, in both situations, I should just walk away. But, the biggest issue is always money. How do you get things done? How do you pay for them? And so I think in the deployment of smart cities, creating an incremental step that allows you to kind of move through the process and add functionality as solutions are required. So I really feel it's communications. Communications is the backbone. You put in a cost-effective communication system. So, this device right here costs about $100, plugs in, it has an LTE chip, it has Wi-Fi. I can use this, $100 device to then communicate with a traffic control box. So now for $500, I can provide communications into a traffic control box that would require 10, 15, 20,000 if I was to run fiber and bring in communications that way. So, kind of looking at the infrastructure, looking at the problems that need to be solved today, and then figuring out how you can do it in a cost-effective solution. And then finally, it has to be simple, right? It has to be a solution that can be absorbed by the staff once you turn it over. Because I can't tell you how many times I've gone into facilities and I would see a giant control cabinet that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you say, well, what does that do? And they're like, well, we don't know, we turned it off. So it has to be a solution that can be maintained over the long period. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Doug, would you like to go next?
Sure. Just final thoughts and takeaways. We all know these technologies are available in many cases now. As John has talked about, he's in the middle of working with the City of Greenville right now to relamp about 110 streetlights along Fair Forest Way with high-efficiency LED that will include the weightless micro-positioning and the ultra-wideband communications. And looking at that from a city's perspective, they've had to learn how to plan to do that. They also need to learn how to budget over the next few years to understand what that payoff is going to be and what their return on investment is going to be. Once that's discovered and understood, then the next step, in my opinion, is to come into the educational component of it, to not just educate the people on city staff, but also to begin educating the community how this may impact and improve our standard of living in this area. So that, to me, is education and communication is going to have to come hand in hand, and that needs to be done in conjunction with the city. And as David said in the past, where you've got someone who's an advocate to really come in and help make that effort to do the education in a local community. Thanks, everybody, for letting us do this today. I appreciate it. That's it.
Thanks, Doug. Frank, you are next.
Thank you. Just a couple things. Just remember, while becoming a smart city, make sure to develop long-term plans. What happens when the warranty runs out is one of the things I would say. Be sure to focus on data security. Data security is one thing that's, and data integrity is a few things that come up quite a bit. Make sure it's written into any contracts that you have with any vendors, what they're going to do with information that they collect. Of course, they pass it on to you, but what do they do with it? Make sure that's clear, clearly represented. And make sure you have flex in your policy, your strategic plans and goals, because what you're going to find out is what you don't know. As you become smarter, you're going to find this thing is moving so fast, you'll go through legislation and put a policy in place and find out very soon after that you need to make some changes or tweaks to that. So always represent, and when you're talking in public about those plans, be sure to give that asterisk or that caveat that we're going to continue to get better. There won't be a one-stop shop type of approach to becoming a smart city. And lastly, I would just say, don't focus so much on the tech that you forget about the people in the process. This thing has to be about people, and many have mentioned you don't want to spend so much time to become smart that you alienate people. You miss out on equitable options and decisions, and not educate, as was mentioned before, people on how these items impact their lives in a positive way. Please, 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 those of you in leadership, be sure to not forget about the people that are on your staff and also the people that we serve. Thank you.
All right, and George, parting comments.
Yes, in the interest of time, I just want to stress the fact that there's a lot of technology. Don't get overwhelmed. Plan, manage. You can organize this if you just, again, work in advance of what's coming, understand how it impacts your community, and then pick an area where you think you can best support the needs of your particular city. and see that it's implemented properly. So don't be afraid to take this on. I guess what I'd like to say also is that if you don't control the technology technology will in fact control you. So take it head on and find out what's best for your particular community.
Thank you, George. And finally, Dave, parting thoughts.
Thanks so much for hosting us today. Some parting thoughts I would offer is get some rules on the books. We spoke earlier about get some rules in the books to control the aesthetics, to maintain your view sheds. Get some rules on the books so you can generate that $500 per street light, and with those 400 plus 5G towers per square mile coming, get some rules in the books so you can do the co-location. That's how Centennial, as I mentioned when I was with them, was able to bring in Ting fiber to gigify the city. That was all done through a traffic signal interconnection program that we did there, and we were able to reuse that existing capacity. So get rules in the books for aesthetics, get rules in the books so you can generate the revenue, get rules on the books so you can do this co-location and get fiber everywhere. That way, the point that John had made earlier, yes, you can do it wirelessly, but fiber has a lot more robust. To Doug's point earlier about micro-positioning, it all becomes possible with the fiber that you can, in fact, install for pennies on the dollar if, as I said, you have those rules on the book. Those are really crucial. Get those underway now, and you'll be well positioned for a smart city future.
Thank you, Dave. That is all the time we have for today. I want to thank Dave and George, Frank, Doug, and John for sharing their knowledge and experience with us. This is Rita Cassada, and it has been a pleasure moderating this program for you. Remember to register for the next program in the series called Talking Top Tech, Cybersecurity Edition. It will be on Thursday, June 20th at 10 Central. And don't forget to fill out the evaluation form. The link to the survey will be emailed after the program today. A recording of today's program will be available in APWA's members library and on YouTube within a week. APWA members can log on to the members library and access past Quick Listen and Learns and Talking Top Tech and conference content free of charge. Have a great day. Thank you for your attendance.